because quite often reports just end up being this dead piece of information that everybody knew about anyway, like, because you're in constant dialogue with the children and the parents, and then you have this document that takes forever to put together and is just old news because you've already had other conversations about those things since. So it's kind of that there's a whole question there about what a meaningful report looks like, that's useful for the students and their parents moving forward as a tool. Yeah, so I'm just thinking out loud. Like,
I love the thinking out loud. I totally agree with you. Report cards tend to be this redundant thing. Like, all the rich evidencing and conversations have been happening to all important stakeholders. So now I have to spend hours upon hours outside of the classroom, away from the kids I value so much, drafting this report card. Well, no, I don't do it that way anymore. I spend the time in class talking with kids and having their words shape the report card. One series of questions I love to ask students in this conference, this report card conference, is, of all your evidence across our span of time together, pull out one thing you're most proud of. What's a highlight for you? What's something you're most proud of? And they say the darndest things. Some of them talk about competencies, how I grew as a critical thinker. Some of them talk about their growth as a learner. I came in shy and introverted, and through collaboration and communication, I grew confidence. Some of them identify an artifact. Maybe it's an essay, or maybe it's a digital, item. One student last quarter made a virtual reality artifact where I had to wear the goggles to get into his learning. So that was his highlight. So the report card, when we ask questions like that, begin to take on a totally different tone and purpose when they're embedded in questions that are authentically meaningful to the student, as well as informing all stakeholders of student growth and progress. Another question I love to ask students is, pull out one challenge you encountered as a learner. What's one thing you had to grapple with? And describe that challenge and what was hard about it. And then what's a strategy you utilized to overcome that challenge? The report card takes on a whole different narrative when we ask our students these questions. Not only are we co-writing it, but it's highly, highly personalized. After this conference, and these conferences for me take 10, 15 minutes a student. After these conferences, I read back the comments to students, and I typically have 2 or 3 paragraphs written that they shared with me. And I ask them, do you approve? Is this what you want to go home? And it is a conversation. I suggest things. I lend some voice as well. And eventually the student, beams with pride saying, yes, that sounds great. Thank you. Wow. That takes on a whole different slant on reporting, doesn't it, Becky? When it's that much rooted in student voice. I think that conversation tends to happen more often at the elementary school level, if I'm frank. I think elementary practitioners are doing these things with kiddos. Why isn't it happening at the middle school level? Why aren't we harnessing more student voice in these formal reporting processes at the high school level? And I do propose it should. It absolutely should. So the questions matter, Becky, don't they? To bring more purpose to oftentimes those reporting processes that are void of student voice and student engagement and student ownership.
Yeah, I love all of that. And I was just thinking, actually, you say that happens more often in primary. It can do. However, it's often something that's decided by leadership. So you don't really have a choice, and it's got to be the same. But every year group's got to have the same. So unless you're really lucky and you get to co-create that, or that is your school's policy, it doesn't necessarily get done like that. So I love those questions, and I love how individualized and personalized that could become. And it also makes me think of one of the speakers that we're going to have in September. It is a guy called Mark Finnis, and he focuses on restorative practice, and he talks about things being done to, for, and with students. So
very good.
reports are so often done either to or for them, and they've got no agency or say, and they've got no idea what's going to come out. But what you've just described is complete witness. It's like, we'll design this together. You'll tell me what you want to say. I'll coach you through it, and then I'll read you back and ask for your approval. And then how empowering. They'll be so excited about that report going home, and then they get to share that with their parents. So I love all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, really quickly, I threw a link in the chat. In the new book, there are over 200 guiding questions that I ask, which is staggering. When I counted them, I was like, really? That's a lot of guiding questions. And some of the guiding questions are for teachers, to reflect on, how are we giving more ownership? How are we giving more control? How are we empowering our students more in the learning. So there are some guiding questions for teachers to reflect on their practice. And then there are a lot of guiding questions to use with students to help them get to know themselves better as learners. I did propose earlier, we need to spend more time designing guiding questions in our practice to facilitate that talk and share the role, or share the direction, I should say, excuse me. The resource I share a link or shared in the chat is a curation of all those questions from the book. All 200 plus questions are categorized in that PDF. It's going to be released as part of the launch of the book on Saturday, but it's there for you to share out and use as you see fit. And some of those questions are sparking the student reflection and the student voice, not just in assessment, but in the sharing of the landscape of learning of which we find ourselves in with students. So please look at that resource. I think it's quite helpful and it's an exciting one.